للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين وصل وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I didn't have to say anything. I was like, oh, one of those speakers. Well, sorry? No, it's not a movie. I want everyone awake, inshallah. It depends. Do you guys want the lights off? Is it difficult to see the presentation? Or maybe you could dim the lights. You want to dim the lights? Okay. Yes. Okay. So welcome everyone to the second imaginary line event. The concept of the imaginary line came to us last year when we noticed that there was a discrepancy between Islam and science and how Muslims viewed these two bodies of knowledge. And so we decided to make an event that was aimed at tackling this misconception or this quote-unquote imaginary line that seemed to exist in people's minds in regards to Islam and science. Last year we discussed the theory of evolution. So it's much more about the conflict that could arise between these two bodies of knowledge. And what do we do when there's a perceived conflict between the Quran and what Allah is telling us, what our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is telling us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and what scientific theory is telling us. And we felt that it was extremely crucial, especially in the university environment, to tackle these issues because, just show of hands, who here has taken at least a course related to something related to science? Related to science somehow. Pretty much everyone has taken at least one course, even if they're not in a science program. You know, they've taken that psychology course or that anatomy course or whatever. And so we felt that it was extremely important to tackle this issue. And so last year we discussed mostly the approach of Islam and science. It was more of a methodological lecture, and we had a special focus on analyzing the theory of evolution and justifying intellectually our position. This year, inshallah ta'ala, we are taking another turn. And we are going to be discussing a body of knowledge within science that isn't in conflict with Islam. In fact, it's in complement with Islam and the Islamic teachings. It's something in which you don't really see conflict, but you see harmony. And this is also an important thing to discuss because when we are able to see the new modern insights that psychology research is explaining to us and is discovering, then we're able to enhance our understanding of different spiritual concepts of our own faith, and we're able to enhance our understanding of the human condition in general. And that's why Islam and psychology is the topic that we've chose today. Psychology is the... Who can tell me what psychology is? Who here is in PNB program or in the psych program? Wow, one person. Islam and psychology, one person from PNB, mashallah. Anyways, who here has taken at least some psych courses? Okay, pretty much all of you. So, what is the study of psychology? Yes?
Human behavior.
Human behavior. What else does psychology study? From the sisters? Taking psychology courses, you just don't know what psychology is all about. Okay, no, just kidding. Yes?
Study of the human mind.
The study of the human mind. So we have the mind, we have behavior and?
Emotions.
Emotions within mind. Neuroscience as well. So it's the study of these different aspects of the human being. So Islam is a religion in which really gets at the core of the psyche of the human being in terms of what it expects from us. Emotions are something that are inherently tied to our faith. When we are worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal, we are expected to be in a certain emotional state. And psychology studies emotions. And so here you can kind of see where this imaginary line is blurred. But before going into the meat of the presentation, I want to just take a step back and discuss something to really clear up the doubts concerning whether or not science and Islam there's a line between them, there's a divide between them, there's a boundary. And this is the concept of the Ayat of Allah. The Ayat of Allah. What is an ayah?
Verse.
A verse. Okay. Anyone else? What is an ayah? Without looking at the PowerPoint, you know what's funny? I'm really bad with tech. I wanted to have this PowerPoint presentation, you know, where it's like sequential, because I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't have time to ask someone before we came here, so everything's kind of all out there. But without looking at the board, what other kind of ideas comes to your mind when you think of the word ayah?
Revelation.
Revelation, verses, yes?
Something that when you see it, it resonates with you, like being a sign. Something
Yeah, it's a sign.
like
A miraculous sign. Okay, a miraculous sign. Okay. So really linguistically, ayah is really referring to, as Ahmad was mentioning, a miraculous sign. A miraculous sign which can also serve as a lesson. So there's these two components. Miraculous sign, and it can serve as a lesson. And there's different ways you can categorize ayat of Allah, this miraculous signs of Allah that can serve a lesson for us. One of the categorization systems is what you see in front of you. Ayat Qur'aniyya, and ayat kawniyya. Ayat Qur'aniyya are, as the brother was mentioning, the ayat of the Qur'an. The smallest unit within the Qur'an is an ayat, right? The verses of the Qur'an are called ayat. Tilka ayatul kitab al-mubin. Right? These are the ayat of the clear book. These are the miraculous signs of the clear book. This is referring to the verses of the Qur'an, and that's because we believe as Muslims that every verse in the Qur'an, every ayah in the Qur'an is a miracle, right? It's that miraculous sign, and it serves, of course, a lesson for us. And so this is referenced in the Qur'an here. And we are encouraged to learn about the ayat of Allah in the Qur'an, right? We're encouraged to learn about the Qur'an. We're encouraged to learn about the ayat of the Qur'an. Are we not? The Prophet ﷺ said, the best of you are the ones who learn the Qur'an and teach it to others. And so this is something that's encouraged. And we have volumes upon volumes of scholarship delving into the science of interpreting the verses of the Qur'an and learning the verses of the Qur'an and benefiting from these ayat. Ayat Qur'aniyya. So what was the first type of ayat? Everyone? Ayat what? Qur'aniyya. Okay, good. The second type of ayah, because there are ayat that Allah mentions in the Qur'an that aren't found within the pages of the Mus'haf. They are outside the boundaries of the Qur'an. They are outside the book of the Qur'an. But Allah references them. And Allah encourages us to learn about them. So we have the book, or scripture, the book of the Qur'an. But we also have the book around us. The book of nature. The ayat of existence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, in the creation of the universes, the cosmos, the heavens, وَالْأَرْضِ, and the earth, وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ, the alternation of the night and the day. So Allah is referencing now, Allah is describing all of creation, right? This is as comprehensive as you're going to get, a list of all of creation. Samawat, all of the heavens, all of the universes, all of the earth. What is in this? There are ayat here. There are ayat also here, not just in the Quran. There are ayat in nature. There's ayat in existence. Kawniyya is existence, the ayat of existence for people of sound intellect. And we are also equally encouraged as well to learn about the ayat of Allah, not just in the book, but also around us. And what is the study of natural phenomenon except science? Right? When you study science, scientific theory is about investigating and learning and understanding natural phenomenon around us. And this is something that our book encourages us to do. أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ, do you not observe, do you not see? And Allah says, do you not see the camel? Do you not look at the mountains? Do you not look at the earth? Observe. Empiricism. أَوَلَمْ يَتَّفَكَّرُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, do they not critically think within themselves? So we have two things here. Observation and critical thinking. What are these two components of? Scientific method. Science. This is something that's encouraged within our faith. And that's why it's called the imaginary line, because this line doesn't exist within our faith. It's something that's extremely encouraged for us to look at the signs of Allah in existence. And in understanding and in appreciating the ayat of Allah around us, we gain a deeper appreciation for Allah Himself. When you study the cosmos, who here is take big questions? Big questions. Astronomy. Alright. Big questions. Deals with the study of cosmology, the universe. SubhanAllah, when you just realize the vastness of space, the amount of galaxies and cluster galaxies and stars and orbits and all the forces and natural phenomena that are there that create a beautiful image as well. You are in awe. You gain knowledge of Allah's creative ability. And so that even brings you closer to Allah. And that's the point of the ayat. Now the ayat we're going to be talking about are the ayat within ourselves, within our own mind. And we're going to be discussing this, inshallah ta'ala. So, moving on with the presentation after that brief introduction, we're going to be speaking about positive psychology. Psychology is a huge discipline. We talked about what psychology is. Psychology, there's many different studies that you can do within the field of psychology. So we need to narrow our scope. We have just an hour and a bit with us today. So we need to narrow our scope. What field within psychology are we going to be talking about? What field do you think after looking at the slides?
Positive.
Positive psychology, exactly. You guys are very perceptive, mashallah. So we're going to be talking about positive psychology within the field of psychology. Positive psychology is an extremely new field. It's a very recent field. It dates back to the year 2000. Who here is taking the positive psych course that's offered at McMaster? Hands way up, guys. I need to kind of see. Okay. So positive psychology is an extremely new field. The year 2000 when it was developed. And the reason why this new field developed, it's actually interesting. It was developed, or it was spearheaded by a man by the name of Martin Seligman. Dr. Martin Seligman. And what had happened was, him and other psychologists had realized that for the last century in modern Western history in terms of science, psychology has focused on a very narrow part of the human being. Psychology is only focused on mental illness. Right? When we think of psychology, what kind of images conjure up in your mind? What kind of images? Shout out some words. Neurons. Depression, brain. Freud. You might think of, the guy on that couch and then the guy's sitting on the chair. What's going on? Tell me about your dreams. Tell me about whatever. You're thinking of mental illness. You're thinking of what drives people insane, essentially. And that's what psychology was concerned with for a very long time. The negative side of the human condition. And so Martin Seligman, in the turn of the 21st century, he says we need to reshift the focus. We're looking at, okay, how does an average person, normal person, go to become crazy or depressed or anxious or whatever mental illness? We also need to study what makes this average normal person become happy with his life, satisfied, content. How do human beings achieve inner happiness, meaning in life? And so this is the target of the study of positive psychology. And as you can see, it's the scientific study of human strengths and virtues that enable individuals to thrive. They study what is it about the human being in terms of emotions, what positive emotions they feel, and in terms of traits, what characteristics do they have that enable them to live lives worth living, living the good life. That is the study of positive psychology. Now, just like how we had to go down from psychology to positive psychology, the subdiscipline, likewise, Islam is a bahr, it's an ocean of ilm, of knowledge. We also need to focus our scope on one discipline or area of Islamic studies that matches and correlates with positive psychology. And that is tazkiyatun nafs. Who here's heard of that term before? Show of hands. Tazkiyatun nafs. Okay. Tazkiyatun nafs, you want to literally translate it. Tazkiyah means to develop, to grow, to purify. Nafs is the self. Put that together, self-development, self-growth. That is the science of tazkiyatun nafs within our rich spiritual tradition. And there's a whole 1400 years of scholarship dedicated to this field of studying what? Human strengths, virtues. What is it about the human being that can enable him to come closer to Allah and live a life of happiness, contentment? How can one have an inner Jannah inside his heart when he's worshipping Allah? What attributes, what emotions should one feel throughout his day when he's hit with certain life events, maybe traumatic life events, or good things that happened in his life? This is a whole field of Islamic study. And it's really interesting actually because in modern times you have this new growth of this the notion of self-help books, self-development training, where you have seminars of people, psychologists sometimes they're just their own freelancer type groups where they offer seminars for people to come in, and it's about advertised as reach your full potential, right? Be all that you can be, right? Develop yourself. And people pay thousands of dollars to go to these self-help workshops. They pay money to buy the books. It's because this is an area which has been neglected, and that's why Dr. Martin Seligman mentioned that, and that's why this whole field is coming up. It's been neglected in their life, and the religions in which were exposed to the West, they didn't necessarily have this science that Islam has as well. And so they're now focusing towards this aspect of self-growth and self-development, but this is something the Muslims have had for the last 1400 years. And what's a shame is that in positive psychology, and this is very interesting, in positive psychology, they actually accepted that, okay, in the recent modern Western history, we haven't really had exposure to insights about this area of human nature, of the strengths of human beings. And so they said, this is within the study of positive psych, and those who have taken the positive psych course, they know that you actually study as a unit in positive psychology Buddhism and Hinduism. It's its own unit. And what's the reason for this? Because the positive psychologist said, hey look, okay, the ancient Eastern traditions and philosophies, they have some interesting spiritual insights that we didn't have access to. Let's scientifically study these things. The practices that the yogis, the Hindus are engaged in, let's study this. What effect does it have on the mind? Mindfulness meditation of the Buddhist monks, let's study this. What effect does it have on the mind? They seem to have something that we don't. Let's study it. Let's unearth the treasure of Buddhist philosophy, of the Hindu spiritual tradition. And the reason why I said it's a shame is because they haven't done this with Islam. And we are partly to blame for that. Why do I say we're partly to blame? Because people view Islam of what we view Islam and what we talk about with Islam. What are the things that we're engaged in terms of discussion about Islam? Halal, haram meat, machine slaughter versus non-machine slaughter. We've limited the discourse to our deen to this very narrow corner of just rules and regulations, which is obviously important. I'm not saying that. This is obviously important. But you're missing the most important part of our deen. This aspect of purifying yourself and developing yourself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. What do you think true success is? Or what do people think success is, Liza? Let's just shout it out. What do people think? Not necessarily you, but what do people think?
American dream.
The American dream, which is money, owning, house ownership, yeah, money, what else? Power, fame. You measure and gauge your success based on these criterion. The Quranic criteria for success in this life is how well you've developed yourself, how well you've grown as an individual. That is true success. That is true success. And how often do we discuss these types of issues within our conversations about Islam? Is our Islamic conversation limited to just politics, to just, halal, haram? Or do we also talk about the spiritual figures within our tradition that help us and enable us to adopt certain strengths and virtues that will lead to happiness? And it's really sad also because Muslims themselves, they sometimes go outside of the deen, not in terms of leaving Islam, but they go outside of the deen to search for some sort of contentment. You find Muslims involved in the yoga practices, mindfulness meditation, right? Without understanding and realizing that Islam has a whole tradition of spirituality that's completely been buried by us. And so inshallah, it's my hope by the end of this presentation to kind of bring out some of these treasures, inshallah. Bring out some of these treasures and we can see what Islam not only has to offer for ourselves and our own development and our own growth, but also even for the West in terms of the discipline of psychology as well. So, forward. I need some help. I told you I'm bad with tech.
Just hit it.
Battery
Just
died.
hit what? Just hit it?
Yeah, you're
Battery died.
Scare it into working, right? Yo,
Battery died.
battery died. Okay. Can someone sit there and just kind of move?
You got it.
Jazakallah khair.
If I get taking notes.
Okay. Okay. So as I was mentioning, I talked about, and this is something that's really interesting, and I brought some quotes from medieval scholars of our tradition and quotes from positive psychologists, and I've matched them up. Because like I was saying, that we don't realize the treasure that we're sitting upon. We don't realize this. And what's really interesting is that our scholars, specifically Ibn al-Qayyim, he analyzed psychology at his time. Ibn al-Qayyim was a medieval scholar. He died 751 after the Hijrah, which is around 14th century CE. Ibn al-Qayyim, he analyzed current psychology, the current body of knowledge in terms of psychology at his time. And he made certain criticisms of this body of knowledge. He made certain criticisms. And it's really interesting because these criticisms are only being responded to 7 centuries later. It's as if it took 7 centuries for them to realize about the different pitfalls and limitations of psychology. And it's really interesting because when you put them together, it's as if Ibn al-Qayyim is having a conversation with these modern psychologists. That you have Ibn al-Qayyim make a criticism, and then positive psychology is acknowledging this was the problem, this is the solution. In the 21st century, 7 centuries later. Our scholars, subhanAllah, they were extremely intelligent. They were deep critical thinkers. Ibn al-Qayyim, in the time of quote-unquote the Dark Ages, his intellect, he's able to engage in a discourse at the level of PhDs at sub-disciplines of psychology without having been exposed to any of what they've been exposed to for the 20th century. So here, Journal of Positive Psychology. Because psychology wasn't previously focusing on this aspect, Journal of Psychology, it says, it focuses on aspects of the human condition that lead to happiness. This is something that we're now studying. What did Ibn al-Qayyim say 7 centuries earlier? The current state of psychology does not inform us of what leads to happiness and what are its obstacles and barriers. SubhanAllah. It's as if it's a direct response. Positive psychology from Ibn al-Qayyim's critique. And this is in Miftah Dar al-Sa'ada. Psychology should be concerned with nurturing high talent. Current state of psychology does not inform us of how to develop these good qualities. What does Ibn al-Qayyim say? Current state of psychology falls short in informing us how to nurture positive qualities. And this is really interesting. There's in the study of positive psychology, they actually scientifically study the dimension of spirituality within the human being. And they accept this, that okay, there's an aspect of the human being that we're going to term and categorize as spirituality. And they say that spirituality is a dimension of human nature that we need to start, first of all, accepting and studying, because it's a source of human strength. But not only strength, there was a paper by Robert A. Emmons, who is a leading expert in this field of positive psychology of spirituality. He wrote a paper in the year 2000 arguing that spirituality is actually a type of intelligence. That you have those different types of intelligence, right? You have like mathematical intelligence, linguistic intelligence, artistic intelligence. There's like this long list of types of intelligence. Well, he lists also that the criterion that are used to qualify these things as intelligences is the same criterion that you can use to list spirituality as a type of intelligence. And this is something we've already known. It's been in our text as well. أَمْ لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ يَعْقِلُونَ بِهَا, as Allah says in the Quran. Do they not have hearts by which they reason by? Allah is saying, do they not have that spiritual intelligence and that spiritual intellect to reason? And Ibn al-Qayyim mentions in Miftah as well, the journey of spiritual development is, number one, the key to happiness and the richness of the intellect. This link between spirituality and intellect was something that we've already known. But only modern psychological discourse is starting to unearth and realize. And that's what I said about how Islam has a lot to offer for positive psychology. The spiritual tradition of Islam is something that should be studied within this realm, as Buddhism is studied and as Hinduism is studied. And the spiritual practices within Islam will be infinitely more superior than other spiritual practices, because ours is based on revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereas the others are just based on man-made philosophies. And this is our iman, this is our conviction. Next one. So now we're going to segue into the core of this presentation, and that is emotions. That is emotions. So I kind of give a brief introduction, or kind of somewhat thorough, about positive psychology in Islam and kind of setting the stage. But as you've seen in the event description, who here has read the event description or knows what's going on? Okay. Oh, not many people. I spent so much time writing that. Anyways, so we're going to be talking about emotions. And emotions are at the core of human experience. Your life is made up of your emotional reaction to your life events. And that's what determines your quality of living. The events themselves, the amount of money you have, it doesn't determine your life satisfaction. It's the emotions you feel. Do you have negative emotions or positive emotions? And it's something that, as I was mentioning at the beginning of my talk, it is central to Islam, because emotions are tied to ibadah, to worship of Allah, so intimately. It is something so emphasized that worshipping Allah without devoid of any emotions you're actually feeling is not complete worship. And in fact, some may even say it's not worship at all. The emotional state is something that we need to strive to develop within ourselves as we're worshipping Allah. And this is the crux of the presentation. To come up with some practical tips on how to develop these emotions in our salah, for example. That's the most basic thing. I'm going to be using salah mostly for this presentation as an example, because it's something that we do all the time. And it's something that everyone asks, how do I develop khushu in salah? I'm often told in the khutbahs and the lectures and the halaqas, I have to be feeling love, hope, and fear while I'm praying. Or I'm supposed to be feeling certain emotions or spirituality when I'm praying and standing before Allah. But for some reason, I just don't feel anything. And so by looking at emotions from a psychological perspective, by studying it as psychologists do, what the benefit is that we are able to simplify a very complex concept. Emotions are extremely complex. And when we break them down, we can then see, oh, okay, this is what part I was missing in my salah. This is what I can work on so I can get that feeling in my salah. So I can get that khushu in my salah. That's the, inshallah ta'ala, the aim for this presentation. So what are the components of emotions? The first component of emotions is the cognitive component. What is cognition? Who knows what cognition is? The psych people. Thinking, exactly. Cognition is thinking, your thoughts in your head. That is cognition. So the cognitive component of emotions are the thinking component of emotions. What are your thoughts? The link between your thoughts and your emotions. So this is really the first step of any emotional experience. There's a paper by Barbara Fredrickson, 2004, and she said that emotions arise when we make a conscious or unconscious assessment of the personal meaning of a past event. In other words, something happens to you, and you think to your head, what does this mean to me? How does this affect me? Is this good or bad? You think thoughts in your head, and this can be either conscious or even unconscious, you don't even know. Conscious or unconscious assessment. And based upon your construal of the event, your emotional reaction is according to that. So for example, just to make this more concrete, you are walking and you trip and you fall. Okay? You trip, a big life event in your life. You trip and you fall. And so you think to yourself, is there anyone around? Okay, no one's around. Did I hurt myself? Am I feeling any pain? No. Okay, neutral, apathetic response. Get yourself up, dust yourself up, act like nothing happened, right? You just walk up. But what if you tripped and fell? Imagine this scenario. You know, you've been emailing one professor for a very, very long time. You want to do research for that professor. And you know, he or she had never gone back to you. And then one time, the professor's like, okay, fine, come to my class, we'll talk. And you're like, I gotta make the best first impression. You go, wear your nice clothes, you're ready to nerd it up and show what you got to her or him. And so then you go, and then the first thing that happens is you trip and you fall. What do you think would be different between this event and the previous event? What do you guys think?
Repercussions.
Repercussions?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Falling down and somebody saw that, right?
So someone saw that. Okay, so number one, you're embarrassed because, oh snap, my professor saw me, and so my first impression is ruined. Yes?
You'd basically be more emotional towards the situation as if like then falling in a regular situation, because the personal meaning to this, it has like a very strong personal meaning to you. You're trying to impress that person, and it's much more important than just walking.
Exactly, exactly. For those who didn't hear, she basically mentioned that because you're disappointed in the fact that you ruined your first impression, that thought in your head, now naturally you think about someone like this, they're going to be feeling what? Negative emotions. Disappointment, sadness, sorrow, grief, all these different things. Regret, right? All these different things. And so, but let's take this another step. You can even have the same life event, or you're using a life event like it's so grand, but I'm using such like small examples. You can have the same thing happen to you in the same environment, two different people, and you get two vastly different responses. Example, you trip and you fall with your friends. One person, you know, he's with his friends, he's secure, and so he just laughs it off with his friends, you know, it's a funny thing, it's an overall positive experience, and then they go forth. But then also there could be people who are insecure about themselves, and then they fall in front of their friends, and their friends start laughing, and they feel embarrassed, they feel insecure, and it's a vastly different experience. They're sad about it. The exact same thing, completely different emotions. This is the power of cognition on emotion, about how you view an event, determining your overall emotional experience. And obviously this is something that our deen had also emphasized to us as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, عَسَىٰ أَن تُكْرِهُ شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. It's possible something happens to you in your life that you don't like, that you dislike, but it's actually better for you. It's actually better for you. And part of our belief as Muslims is that everything that happens in our life is by the qadr of Allah, by the decree of Allah. And Allah doesn't decree for us except goodness. There's going to be some goodness in there. That silver lining under the dark cloud. And so the believer, with this worldview, with this understanding, with this cognition in his mind, anything that happens to him, he's thinking, okay, where's the positive? Allah has placed positive somewhere, where is it? And so this way, your emotions are much more secure with this worldview. As a Muslim, it's easier for you to live a happier life when you have this understanding in your head. قُلْ لَن يُصِيبَنَا إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا هُوَ مَوْلَانَا. Say that nothing happens in our life except it has been written by Allah, lana, for us, not alayna, against us. Everything, good or bad, lana, for us. What's the difference between something being for you and against you? Yes?
Positive and negative.
Which one's positive? For you is positive, right? I'm doing this for you, for your sake, for you. That's a positive thing. Against you is, this is against you. This is a thing, again, it's a negative thing. Allah says, no, everything is lana. Whatever it is, good or bad, it is for you. Huwa maulana. And He is our protector and whom we place our reliance on. The Prophet ﷺ also said, in a very famous hadith, in a very deep hadith, and it really speaks volumes about this specific topic about emotions and cognition. And that is, عَجَبًا لِأَمْرِ مُؤْمِنٍ. Amazing, astonishing is the affair of the believer. The believer with his mindset, with his worldview, there's good in everything. Something bad happens to him, he's patient. He realizes this is an opportunity for me to show patience. And my sins can be forgiven. I can be wiped clean by this. And so that's good for him. Something good happens to him. He shows shukr. He shows gratitude. He doesn't let it inflate his ego and become arrogant. That is good for him. So in everything it is good for the believer. And this is tied to our cognition, our construal in life. And so this is extremely important for us as well. In terms of salah. What is the cognitive portion of salah? What do you guys think? The meaning of the ayat, that's really good there. Thinking about what you're saying in salah. Right? That's the cognition. What else? Yeah?
Thinking about what you're actually doing.
Thinking about what you're actually doing. Thinking in your head when you say Allahu Akbar. Thinking in your head, the cognitive component. I am standing before Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah is watching me. And knowing that, we know that Allah doesn't turn away from the slave unless the slave turns away from Allah in the salah. Yes?
Slowing down, making the right posture. Isn't that
What does that have to do with cognition?
Because it's really easy to go in the flow and just quickly slowing down and thinking about what you're doing.
Yeah, so exactly he's mentioning that when you have a certain feeling in the salah, then it will lead you to not go by just quickly. You're actually feeling it by savoring every moment and going by slowly. But we're talking more cognitive component here. So we mentioned two really good examples. Number one, understanding the ayat. And that's a key component about developing khushu'. Right? Studying Surah Fatiha, for example. Knowing what Surah Fatiha is for the believer. Thinking in your head what you're doing, as the brother was mentioning. That you're standing before Allah Azza wa Jal. This is the cognitive component of emotion. And this will help us to develop that proper emotional reaction. Yes. The next one is emotions and consciousness. Emotions and consciousness. So this is the actual raw conscious experience of the emotion. When you think of emotion, you're thinking of this component of emotion. Emotions are a lot of components, right? This is usually what you're thinking of. That raw experience, that you're aware of your emotional state, your bodily state. You might be shivering because you're scared, or trembling because you're scared, right? You're aware of that. You're aware that you're experiencing something. That's the conscious experience, of emotion. Now this is something that is also emphasized within our deen as well. Allah talks about this component of emotion as well. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهَ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ. That the believers are exclusively those who, when Allah is just merely mentioned, ذُكِرَ اللَّهِ, their hearts, wajil, tremble. Their hearts tremble. They have that raw experience. They have that real emotional and spiritual experience within their heart. That's the conscious component. This is the component you can't fake. You don't have control over. This is something that just comes or it doesn't go. And you can manipulate it. But it's there or it's not. And you can try to manipulate it in terms of your cognitive effort, right? So for example, you're standing in salah. You're not feeling that conscious emotion of salah. You're not feeling that conscious emotion of salah. And you try to think now, okay, I'm using the cognitive technique, right? Okay, I'm standing before Allah, I'm thinking about Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Ihdina Siratal Mustaqim, I'm thinking about all this stuff, but it's just not, it's not happening. I'm not feeling anything still. This is something within Tazkiyat al-Nafs within Islam, we understand as being a sign of a hard heart. A hard heart. This is within the Islamic portion of this discussion. That sometimes your way of thinking, your construals, your cognitions can't impact your heart. Why is that the case? Because your heart is hard. And when your heart is hard, things can't go through. Things can't go through. And so it might be the case where you can think all you want, I'm standing before Allah, but every single salah, you just get distracted, trail onto another thought, and boom, it's over before you know it. You think, man, what happened? This is a sign of a hard heart. And so how do you fix this? Whole discussion within our, this could be a series of presentations about fixing the hard heart. It can even be a semester's topic for our weekly halaqas. I've just mentioned two kind of anecdotes about the main cure of this. Because if we're feeling this, that even though I'm thinking about where I'm standing before Allah Azza wa Jal, and I'm thinking about the ayat of the Quran, I still don't feel anything. Then it's about working on the heart. And one of the most categorically recognized cures for this is dhikrullah, remembrance of Allah. Imam Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah, he was asked, and someone complained to him, I have a hard heart. And he responded, melt it with dhikrullah. Melt it with the remembrance of Allah. And a quote here by Ibn al-Qayyim, when heedlessness, ghafla, being unmindful of Allah, you're not thinking about Allah. Allah and His deen are the last thing on your mind. You're preoccupied with every other thing except Allah and His deen. When this overtakes the heart, so does hardness. But when Allah is remembered, that hardness melts like lead in fire. And nothing will melt it as well as remembrance. Dhikrullah is extremely important in terms of softening the heart. أَلَمْ يَأْنِ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن تَخْشَعَ قُلُوبُهُمْ لِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Hasn't the time come for those who profess Iman to have their hearts softened to the remembrance of Allah, to the dhikr of Allah? And depending on how hard our hearts are, we need to have more of that melting going down until we get to the root of the heart. And until we can experience our hearts trembling when Allah just merely mentioned وَجِلْ قُلُوبُهُمْ, a spiritual state that we all hope to achieve, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of them. Ameen. Next one. So we talked about what are the two components we talked about so far? Who was paying attention, who was sleeping? First one was cognition. Everyone together, guys. Second one was consciousness. Okay. The third component is physiological. Physiology is basically the biological component. And there's a physiological component to emotions. Emotions isn't just something you feel in the heart, but it also has physiological effects. So for example, when you're embarrassed, you blush. Your cheeks get red, right? You blush. When you are happy, you smile. It's almost like a reflex. When you're sad, you frown. There are physiological, when you're scared, you start shivering sometimes out of fear, right? These different things happen. So there are physiological effects through your emotions. And this is something that applies equally to khushu' as well in salah. Khushu', as our scholars described it, Imam al-Qushayri describes, khushu' as an emotion. He has a whole discussion in his risala about khushu'. And all the quotes are about how khushu' is deeply rooted in the heart. But that it also manifests on the limbs, that you can see it in the person's face and limbs. That is what khushu' is. That you can see it in on the limbs. And so one of the signs is, if you're having that khushu', is do you see any changes in your body? Do you see yourself, humbling yourself when you're coming across certain ayat? Do you see changes in your body that you're just forced to change, right? Or even a really, that higher level, that you get goosebumps, or like your hair's, that type of physiological response to praying in salah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala references this as well in the Quran. This component of emotion as well. تَخْشَعِرْ جُلُودُ الَّذِينَ يَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُم. That the julud, the skins of those who have khashya of Allah. Khashya is an emotion we're going to talk about, inshallah. The skins of those who are awestruck by Allah shiver, they quake. They're the physiological component of khashya, of this emotion, discussed in the Quran as well. Next one. Emotion and behavior. This is the last component.
What were the three so far we discussed? Number 1? Cognition. Number 2?
Consciousness.
Number 3?
Physiology.
Alhamdulillah. Number 4? Number 5? Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. Don't know. Okay, good. MashaAllah. I'd be laugh if someone just said something random. So behavior is the 4th component and the final component that we're going to discuss of emotion. So not only does the emotion have, that conscious aspect to it, or that cognitive aspect to it, or even physiological, biological changes, but it also affects your behavior. It affects your behavior. And in different ways, depending on if it's positive or negative. Yes? Sure. Cognition can be both conscious or unconscious. So this is the thing. So consciousness there's many different, when you say consciousness, it can be many different things. When we were talking about it in the second category, it was more your feeling. When we're talking about in this first category, it was more of your wakefulness state. Are you sleeping or are you awake type thing? Like it's a level of consciousness rather than the actual feeling. Because if you're unconscious, then you're not awake, right? Or you're in a coma. And then if you're conscious, it's you're awake and you're aware of the thoughts in your head. Yeah, it can happen. So yeah, for the cognitive, it can happen on both ends. You can actually think about it in your head. So something can happen to you, and naturally you can react in a negative manner because it's a negative experience. But you can consciously override that by thinking, Allah has a plan for me, Allah has this, so on and so forth, and then it changes your emotional experience by the conscious cognitive assessment. But that was a good clarification. Emotion, behavior. So emotion has a behavioral component to it as well, and depending on the type of emotional experience, you have different behavioral responses. So there's this concept for positive emotions that it broadens your behavioral scope. That when you experience a positive emotion, it broadens your behavioral tendency at that moment in time. That you're more open to experience. You're open to do new things. Why? Because you want to keep that feeling lasting. And so you do all you can to keep that positive emotion there. Negative emotions, conversely, they work oppositely, in which they narrow your behavioral tendency. They narrow your behavioral tendency. And that you feel a negative emotion, and it narrows your specific behavioral action tendency to a few actions that act to rid yourself of that negative experience. So fear is linked with the urge to escape. There's a bear in front of you, and you're scared, right? You're not gonna, I'm gonna sit down, have some chai, some gulab jamun, live it up. No, you're gonna run the heck out of there, right? You're at that moment in time, the only thing you're thinking is, I need to escape. It narrows your focus, that emotional experience. Disgust, you see something disgusting, you want to expel it, get rid of it. Either you expel it from its presence, or it expels from your presence. Anger, the urge to attack. These are all three are negative emotions, right? That's why I put it here, negative. And so it narrows your focus. But positive or sacred emotions, they work to broaden your behavioral scope. When you're happy and you're joyed, it's linked with the urge to push the limits, to try new things, to be creative. Interest, urge to explore, take in new knowledge. Contentment, urge to savor current life circumstances. You're happy with with whatever, and so you want to savor life circumstances. And what's also really interesting is that it's called the broaden build theory of positive emotions. That it broadens your behavioral scope and it builds your personal resources. The idea is that positive emotions, I'm going to mention this, try to get it, it's very deep. Positive emotions don't just signal optimal functioning. They can also produce it. Meaning, positive emotions don't just signal that you're good, you're having a good life and good things are happening to you, but they can actually help make good things happen to you. Because when you're happy, for example, and you start being creative and you're pushing the limits, you build personal resources. You build new skills. When you're interested in something, you build new knowledge that can be used for later on. So your positive emotions move you to behaviors which lead to more productive things for you. Do you understand that point? Is that clear? So how does this apply with worship? The emotions of our iman, of our faith, it broadens our ibadah scope. We're on that iman high, right? You're ready to give in charity, ready to fast, ready to pray more, ready to do more dhikr, ready to learn more Quran, ready to memorize more, ready to do all these different diverse things. When you're at that spiritual high, you're motivated to do more to do more ibadah. And that more ibadah in turn increases your iman and your emotions, which then in turn increase the amount of worship which you do. And it's a positive feedback loop.
a positive feedback loop. And the scholars have said about iman and the emotions of iman, al-iman yazidu bi-ta'a wa yanqis bil-ma'siyah. Iman increases with good actions, with obedience to Allah, and decreases with disobedience. And so emotions of iman broaden, the positive emotions we feel broaden our ibadah, and it builds our personal resources with Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? There's a prophetic hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, remember Allah in good times and Allah will remember you in bad times. Right? Building those personal resources. Next one. So just in summary, there's a really, really interesting ayah in the Quran in Surah Isra, which had, you have a question? You have a question?
Yeah, can you just repeat that? It said positive emotions don't just signal something. That
Okay. Positive emotions don't just signal optimal functioning. They also can produce it. So this is the summary. So this ayah contains all components of emotions: cognitive, conscious, physiological, and behavioral. Who wants to take a stab at identifying all these things? Just take a minute, read it, think about it. This is Surah Isra, 107 and 107 to 109. I don't know why I just said 107. إذا يتلى عليهم يخرون للأذقان سجدا. Who wants to take a stab? You want to take it?
Well, so the first part where you start thinking about Quran, so they understand what my standpoint.
So that is which component?
Cognitive.
Cognitive, okay.
Yeah, so they understand. And then the conscious thinking about it. So they feel that, okay, Allah's talking to them.
That's a bit of a stretch. That's not written in there, that's implied.
Yeah.
That's fine. Okay. Yes?
So them falling on their faces is behavioral.
Behavioral, good.
And then weeping is...
He said falling on the faces, sajda is the behavioral, yeah.
Weeping is physiological.
Weeping is physiological response, really good.
And exalted is our master, that's conscious. And that what promise has been fulfilled.
No, that's more cognitive, right? Okay. You're thinking. What's the conscious part? Khushur, that's why I wrote it here. I made it even emphasize. Khushur, that was my whole thing for conscious. That's deeply rooted in khushur. SubhanAllah. So this description, and it's a really, really heart-moving description of the believers. This is actually specifically in الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ, the people given knowledge, and Allah describes them. And it's interesting because in our times, when people start getting a little bit of Islamic knowledge, then they become more arrogant, right? And they become more judgmental. But here, Allah describes people when they receive knowledge as the complete opposite. They humble themselves. They increase them in their khushu and their humility. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when the Quran is recited to them, that cognitive component now, okay, what is Allah saying? They feel, now this isn't, it's not in order, right? But as we can see here, they feel it increases them in khushu'. They have khushu', right? And by the way, this is describing what? Salah, right? When do you recite Quran? When do you go into sajda? When do you say subhanallah? This exalted is our master, subhanallah rabbina. It's in the salah. This is a very deep salah right here that Allah is displaying for us. This is a very life-changing salah that if anyone else were to experience, right? And it has all those components. Is everyone clear with that? Should I kind of go through it again, or are we good? We're good? Alhamdulillah, I got the thumbs up from Amir, so that's good. You guys need a break, or are you guys good? One person said we're good. Is it everyone? No, we're good. Hands up if you want a break. Okay. Oh, one guy wants a break. Okay, let's move on. He said never mind, forget about it. So. Okay. Now we're going to get into specific things. Okay, so we talked about emotions from a very general perspective, and we analyzed them and how we can work on these different aspects for ourselves. Now we're going to be discussing very specific core emotions of Islam. And we're going to be analyzing them, how psychologists analyze them, and seeing the spiritual wisdoms from our tradition as well. And so the first part is going to be on sabr and shukr. Sabr and shukr. Why is sabr and shukr so significant? Someone tell me? Yeah.
Actually, I have a question. You have 4 components of emotions, right?
Yeah.
When were they developed and who were they developed by? So I'm assuming it's this period it was developed on.
Yeah. This was
Allah exactly when it was developed, but this is accepted modern theory. I read it in a paper. It was in 2004, 2006, and it was entitled "Emotions and Consciousness," and it discussed and it categorized it in this type of way. Yeah. So why is sabr and shukr so important? Yeah.
One of the principles of emotion is control your emotional station.
Yeah.
And shukr is important because when you thank, it kind of gives you a positive reinforcement.
Yeah, these are good. No, these are virtues. But why did, out of all the things, right? There's humility. There's kindness. There's forgiveness. There's all these other virtues. Why did I choose these two? Why do you think? Yeah.
They are required for faith.
Required for faith. Okay. How so?
So if you don't have sabr or shukr of Allah, then
there's no faith.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's true. No, exactly. He's right. And I have the quote here. Iman is two halves. Half is sabr, half is shukr. Yeah.
It's also the core of ibadah.
It's the these ones are the core of ibadah. The core of ibadah we're going to get into later. What I want to mention is that this is the core of your life. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ. He created death and life for what reason? لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ. So He can test you. You are tested in the most diverse ways. Many different types of tests and trials. Your school can be a test for you. Your friends can be a test for you. Your family can be a test from you. You know, that anything can be a test from you, right? Your wealth can be a test for you. But despite the fact that tests are so diverse, they come under just two broad headings. Tested with good, or tested with what? Bad. Good or bad. What's the answer to the test for good? Shukr. What's the answer to the test for bad? Sabr. And so sabr and shukr are those essential qualities by which you live your life as a believer. These are the qualities of the believer by which he lives his life. And that he gets through the trials in his life and the tests that Allah tests him with these two qualities. With these two qualities. And in fact, sabr and shukr has been described as the two legs of the believer by which he walks on Sirat al-Mustaqim. Because your life is a series of tests. And every test, every step you take is going to be sabr, shukr, 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 sabr, 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 shukr, shukr, sabr, sabr. So, sabr and shukr is how you walk through life. So we're going to start with sabr. You sure you guys don't want a break?
Yes.
Okay, I think I need the break. That's why I keep asking for it. I think we'll find a break, inshallah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين وصلي وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاك الله خير for letting me take a break. Honestly, the tired thing is just standing for a very long time. I'm an old man. Sabr and self-regulation. Sabr is commonly translated to what? What do you think of the English equivalent of sabr?
Patience.
Patience, right? I suggest a new translation because I think that translation of sabr doesn't fit with how Islam expects us to portray sabr. Yes?
And endurance.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about endurance is really good as well. I think sabr is a better definition for sabr. If you look at its root word, it's to restrain or to detain or to control. And so sabr in regards to a human being is self-control. Self-regulation, self-control. And the significance of which has been discussed both by positive psychologists and of course within our tradition. And we just talked about how sabr is like half of iman. This is a quote from a paper by Baumeister. This capacity for self-regulation has allowed human behavior to attain a range of flexibility and complexity that is truly remarkable. And the Prophet ﷺ told us as well, none can be given a blessing greater than sabr, patience. I put the patience there, but it's really self-control, self-regulation, the ability to control yourself. That is what sabr is all about. Psychological definition, the capacity to override responses. The human being is made up of some innate kind of reflexes that are a bit animalistic, right? We have certain desires, we have certain innate inclinations, and it is sabr or self-regulation that allows the human being to override those desires in order to reach a more optimal behavior. alter inner states, our emotions. Inner states are emotion. And in other ways, change the course of behavior. This is self-regulation according to psychologists. According to Ibn al-Qayyim, it is to exercise. I'll just let everyone come in. Late guys. Sorry.
Nothing to see here, folks.
All right, yeah. Let's give a round of applause. Control myself. So
I'll do it for you.
it's to exercise self-control. Specifically in 3 areas, and this is why I said patience is a bad translation. Because what does it mean to be patient to the commandments of Allah? What does that mean? Self-control in obeying Allah is controlling yourself and your desires and what you could be doing to obey Allah. Right? So there is sabr in the commandments of Allah. What Allah expects from you, you show self-control. You control yourself. You are, you're kicking it with your friends. You're with your brothers or you're with your sisters, and you're having a good time, and Salah is about to end. You have to control yourself and say, okay, let's stop the fun, let's make some wudu, let's pray, and then we can go back. You have to control yourself, right? That takes sabr, that takes self-control, that takes self-regulation. You're not just doing whatever your desires tell you to do. That's sabr in the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then there's sabr in the prohibitions from Allah. Allah has prohibited certain things. So you have to control and restrain yourselves from indulging in those certain actions. From indulging in those limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By crossing the limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? By the hudud of Allah. The limits of Allah. And so that's the prohibitions of Allah. You have to control yourself. You have to have self-regulation. In times of calamity. This is where I could say, okay, fine, the word patience does kind of make sense here. You have to be patient at times of calamity. Not complaining to Allah, why me? Why this? No, you're patient. And you control yourself. And you work to get yourself out of that situation. That is self-regulation. That is self-control. Oh, yeah. I thought I took this slide, but it's still here. But it's important still. So it's interesting because how does Islam and psychology view this sabr, or this self-regulation? So there's a quote by the Baumeister paper. Self-regulation is like a muscle. It's like a muscle. What happens when you work out? Start benching, right? Asad? Get D's, right? What happens when you go to the gym and you work your chest really hard? What happens? You get big. Before you get big, this guy's always big. What happens? You could barely lift probably a cat after you're done with your workout. Right? Mr. Old Big. No. But what happens? Why does that happen? Because, yeah, when you stress your muscles, they become weaker. But what happens is after some rest and after some time, they get stronger, then you get big, right? And you can lift more. And so the positive psychologists view self-regulation similar to a muscle. And that the more you use it, the more it's depleted. And so you could be using up a lot of your self-regulation power, and then at a certain time, it's just very difficult. And then you go, what is it called? What is this called? Rebound, right?
Relapse.
Not relapse. What's the term? Where's Ahmed? Rebound effect, right? It's the rebound effect. Yeah, the rebound effect. The rebound effect, where you not only indulge, but you indulge more than you would have because you're so weak already, right? Just like how when you work out, you're weaker than you were before you worked out. And so it's really interesting because Ibn al-Qayyim mentions something very similar about the psyche. This really shows the intelligence of Ibn al-Qayyim here. From his understanding and insight of the wisdom of the Quran, he is able to speak about psychology at a level of which only experienced people who come up with their own disciplines within positive psychology are talking about. This is Ibn al-Qayyim. That psychologically speaking, and this is in his discussion of sabr, of self-control, every person has two forces at work. So he describes this as well as a force. One is the driving force, which pushes him towards some actions, and one is the restraining force, which pulls him away from some actions. And he says, some are stronger. Sometimes the driving force is stronger within a person, and sometimes the restraining force is stronger within a person. So that's why sometimes you can find people who it's not difficult for them to pray 5 times a day. It's very easy for them. They have good driving force. It's strong. It's healthy. But the restraining force is difficult. You know, they have a girlfriend or they have a boyfriend.
It's difficult. They may be drinking, but they pray 5 times a day, right? This is exactly what Ibn al-Qayyim is talking about. The restraining force isn't as strong. And so it's about working it out like a muscle. And identifying, what is it about me? And there's also people who they don't do anything really bad, but they just can't pray. It's difficult for them to pray. Right? You see this fluctuation, this variability within human beings, and that's within this driving force versus restraining force. Yep. Okay. So now, I should have told you how I'm going to break down these emotions. So if you study, a few people have taken the positive psychology course. The way that you study it is that you talk about the trait, and the definition of the trait, and then the correlates, and like what is it correlated with this trait is correlated with this success or whatever. And then after, like, how do you adopt it? So that's what I want to take the approach. But for the correlates, you have the psych from the psych studies, and then I have like also the Islamic correlates, right? Jannah, salvation, these type of things from the Quran and Sunnah. So just kind of interesting kind of outline. So psychologically, what are the correlates of sabr, self-regulation? This is kind of, you know when you see an Islamic presentation, the virtues of ilm, the virtues of something? This is like the virtues of sabr, but in a more psychological kind of way, the correlates, right? So successful functioning in the majority of one's spheres, self-regulation predicts that. If you want to succeed in whatever you're doing, studies, career, check your self-regulation, because that is a major predictor for success. Failure of self-regulation, conversely, is central to the majority of problems that people encounter. Another interesting thing is self-regulation outdoes IQ in predicting academic success. There is a stronger correlation to academic performance and self-regulation than IQ and academic performance. The Islamic correlates. The Islamic correlates. So I split it up into the dunya and the akhirah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ahlladina amanu sabiru wa sabiru wa rabitu wattaqullaha la'allakum what? Tuflihun. O you who believe, endure, have patience, have self-control, la'allakum tuflihun, so you can succeed. And it's really interesting because that's exactly what Baumeister found as well. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, you want success? Be patient. Allah is with you. Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin. SubhanAllah. This, I don't need to mention any other benefit other than this one. The Ayah of Allah. What does it mean when Allah is with you? Allah is with everyone in terms of obviously His knowledge. Allah knows everything that's happening. But there's a special Ayah for very specific, special type of people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes these people. And this Ayah is Allah is with you in His help. Allah is with you in His mercy and kindness and love and compassion. And Allah will help you in your circumstances. With this type of Ayah, you go throughout life and doors open for you. Things are easy for you because Allah is there to help you. And how can you get the Ayah of Allah? The Ayah means basically the witness with Allah. This is a really good English definition. What's the good English definition for Ayah? Closeness. Closeness, that's a good one. Closeness to Allah. How do you develop that closeness to Allah? In Allah ma'as sabirin. Allah is with the sabirin, those who show self-control. Allah also mentions safeties from others' plots in Surah Al-Imran. Benefit from Allah's signs. Allah says, "Inna fi dhalika la'ayatin likulli sabbarin shakur." This, Allah describes nature and says the only people who benefit from these ayat of existence are sabbar and shakur, the people who exercise self-control. Akhirah, love from Allah. Inna Allah yuhibbul sabirin. Allah loves those who show self-control. You want to gain the love of Allah in your life. You work on your self-regulation, your self-control. Yes?
What's the difference between the love of Allah and Allah being with you?
So love is a general term. It's not like, what do you mean in terms of difference? So one of them is specifying one aspect of the relationship, one of them is specifying another. Love is very specific to Allah's love. Ma'iyah is very general to love and help and all these other things as well. Jannah without any accounting. إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. That verily it's only the case for those who are patient, who have sabr, that Allah will give them their reward, بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ, with no accounting on the day of judgment. SubhanAllah. Greeting by the angels in Surah Ra'd. The angels will come to them when you're entering into Jannah, inshallah, as we all enter into Jannah, inshallah, may Allah make us of them. The angels will come, and of the things they will say, Salamun alaykum tibtum, peace be upon you, good work, good job. Right? And of them, Salamun alaykum bima sabartum. Salamun alaykum, because you are patient. Because of your self-control that you exerted in this life, you have now achieved eternal bliss and eternal pleasure.
Oh, by the way, just a quick point. Who here goes to Origins? Hands up. Okay. As you can see, when it comes to patience, Ali Imran, Ali Imran, Ali Imran, what does that suggest to you about the maqsad of Surah Ali Imran? That it revolves around patience. That it revolves around patience. Okay. Next one. Sabr, how to increase it. So how can we increase sabr? Yes?
What was the family of Ayah Imran patience? Is that what it was?
No. Oh, you mean in terms of the family of Imran, they showed patience? That could be part of it as well. Yeah, well, Ali Imran is mostly, the discourse is revolving around struggle in any type of faith. And the stories mentioned for sure, it has to do with sabr as well. So yeah, that's another good point. Sabr, how to increase it? How do you adopt sabr? So according to Baumeister, he mentions 3 things at the end of his paper on how to increase your self-regulation ability. Number 1, rest. That because sabr is like a muscle, you need rest in order to replenish your sabr, in order to increase your sabr. And so rest is number 1. Number 2, positive emotions. When you experience positive emotions, it has an effect of replenishing your self-control. Replenishing your self-control. Regular exercise of self-regulation as well. You do exercises that discipline yourself. Right? To discipline yourself, that has to do with self-control. Islamically, it's interesting because all of these have also been mentioned by our scholars as well. The Prophet ﷺ, for example, didn't encourage to pray the whole entire night. He said sleep for some of it, rest for some of it. Right? Of the wisdoms, of the many wisdoms in terms of not going to extremes is also, it helps you replenish yourself so that you're focused for Salat al-Fajr. Right? Or you're focused for other acts of worship. Positive emotions. Ibn al-Qayyim actually mentions this, that when you, he mentions this specifically actually, that in order to adopt a sabr and to increase your sabr, realize the benefits of the actions you're doing. So the actions there, Ayah of Allah takes sabr, right? So how do you increase that sabr? Realize the benefits. When you realize the benefits, for example, I'm doing this, I'm going to get a house in Jannah, it will make you happy. And when you experience these positive emotions, it replenishes your sabr, as we just mentioned with Baumeister. And this is something Ibn al-Qayyim mentions explicitly. Regular exercise of self-regulation, this is the most that's the staple in terms of developing patience and sabr within the Islamic spiritual tradition, and that's regular exercise of self-regulation, right? And so there's these exercises of the limbs, like salah and fasting. Fasting acts towards patience, right? What were the 3 components of patience that I mentioned in the beginning? Remember, there were 3 areas of patience that we're expected to have. What was number 1? Solid. Always a good thing to see. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, Zayn. Just mention one.
Patience in worshiping Allah.
Patience in following the commandments of Allah. You remember that? Does that ring a bell? Oh, now you get it. I know, sometimes, honestly, no, it's not your fault. It's my mistake. When you ask a question a certain way, it's hard to figure out what you're looking for.
You said at the beginning, so
yeah, exactly. At the beginning. Yeah.
It was just recent.
Exactly. So, what's the second one? Yeah?
Prohibitions.
Prohibitions, and the third one?
Times of calamity.
Times of calamity. Okay. Fasting works on all 3. Fasting is a command, right, in Ramadan? Commanding Allah. Commandment from Allah. When you are fasting, you are restraining from what? Prohibitions of Allah. Eating, drinking, right? Also, it mirrors a time of calamity, does it not? Time of calamity, you don't have food. It mirrors that state of you. And so fasting is extremely essential in developing sabr. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said when the youth came to him and said, I want to get married but I'm not able to, then he said fast. That will control yourself from falling into your desires. Because fasting is one of those things which develops patience in a very, very efficient way. In a very, very efficient way. The second way, salah as well. Salah and sabr, and it's really interesting actually because one way of increasing sabr that's been found from positive psychology is through meditation. That's when you control yourself to think about something specific, or through just meditation in general, a kind of mindfulness where you just kind of let things go in your mind. It adopts this idea of self-regulation and self-control. Well, salah is that as well, and much more. Because it's not just empty thoughts, it's thoughts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You center your thought towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you have khushu' in salah, it brings that sabr as well. And this is why sabr and salah are linked in the Quran. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. O you who profess iman, seek help with self-control and salah. And so they're linked. Exercise of the heart, dhikr of Allah. When you remember
different types of, for example, when you realize the greatness of Allah and the majesty of Allah, it will help you and motivate you to not disobey Him. It'll help you and motivate you to not disobey Him. When you remember how Allah has blessed you with favors, then it will motivate you not to use these favors to disobey Him. Your eyesight, your vision, your hearing, your seeing, your tongue, your limbs, your muscles, all these different things. It will motivate you. So dhikr is also a big portion of that. And that's the exercises of the heart. So these are the different spiritual exercises within the Islamic world tradition to adopt sabr. Now look at the difference. This is much more exactly, okay, this is exactly what I want to do. This is very general, right? Sam is something very specific. It really goes to the core of these traits so that we can adopt them. Next one. So now we go into shukr. Now we go into shukr. So with shukr, the psychological definition of shukr is an emotional appreciation and thankfulness, an emotional appreciation of and thankfulness for favors received. So feelings of gratitude stem from two different stages of emotional processing. The first one is, you affirm there are good things in your life, so you have to be optimistic and see, okay, there are these certain good things. But the second part as well is, you have to be humble and accept that the goodness that you are receiving lie outside your ability, at least partially. Right? So this is, they didn't write humility, I wrote humility here, because that's what I identified that as, right? You have to humble yourself. From an Islamic definition, and this is the definition provided by Imam al-Qushayri, shukr is being humble so one is able to appreciate the blessings of the one who bestowed them. SubhanAllah. Again, this whole Imam Qushayri is very, very early. 5th century actually, earlier than Ibn al-Qayyim. And he's mentioning the exact same components as gratitude as the definition of positive psychology. And that the root of shukr is humility. The root of shukr is humility. And shukr is really the life of a Muslim, in the sense that if one doesn't have shukr, then he isn't truly able to attain faith, because he's not able to have a sense of motivation to come closer to Allah, in the sense of realizing, okay, I have some things I need to be thankful for. Primarily, we don't worship Allah for shukr. We worship Allah because He deserves to be worshipped. But what is it that motivates us, that points us in that direction? It's that feeling of shukr, which stems from a feeling of humility. So what are the correlates of shukr? So there are a lot of correlates. Number one, life satisfaction, vitality, strength, optimism, lower levels of depression and stress. This is really interesting. Parasympathetic activity. They actually did a study where they induced gratitude experimentally using journal exercise. They had people write down good things that happened in their life, so then they started feeling gratitude. And then they hooked them up to a measure of their heart rhythms. And they compared this group with a neutral condition and with a negative condition where people were induced anger. And they found significant differences in heart rhythms. SubhanAllah. And that the parasympathetic activity increased, which is responsible for that calmness and alertness. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. Right? Verily, without a doubt, in the remembrance of Allah is the تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ, is the calmness, serenity of the heart. And that's exactly what they found here with this concept of gratitude. Islamically, number one, really interesting. Yes?
Sorry, question. What's vitality?
Vitality is like strength. Yeah. Islamic correlations. Really interesting. The first word in the Quran is a statement of shukr. And that's extremely significant. Allah is saying, if you want to achieve guidance from this book, this is where you start. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Realize and recognize this, that all praise and gratitude are due to Allah. Realize you need to have that idea in your brain that there are good things in your life and they lie partially outside of you. You have to be humble to that fact and understand that they come from Allah Azza wa Jal. And then you'll be able to benefit from this scripture. The root of, so I mentioned, the root of Iman is shukr and humility, whereas the root of kufr is arrogance and ingratitude. Right? So it's a nice contrast. So Islamic, first word in the Quran, dunya correlates, benefit from Allah's signs, inna fi dhalika la'ayatan likulli sabbarin shakur. So sabr and shukr are mentioned together for that. Verily, in that are signs for people who exercise self-control and gratitude. Allah will increase you. And it's left general. لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. That if you just show a little bit of shukr, Allah will increase you. It didn't say increase you and you think, oh, increase you in what? Increase me in what? Doesn't make sense, right? I will increase you. In what? Allah left it blank because Allah's rahmah is open for everyone in this sense. That if you should show a little bit of shukr, Allah will increase you in anything. Akhirah, the hereafter. That shukr is the opposite of kufr. And I mentioned this before. Allah says in Surah Insan that inna hadaynahu sabil. Allah, we are the ones who guided him to the path. Imma shakiran wa imma kafura. He can be kafura or not shakira, right? A grateful. Gratitude is used as a synonym for faith. That's how important it is. And salvation as well. مَا يَفْعَلُ اللَّهُ بِعَذَابِكُمْ. What is Allah going to do? Why would Allah punish you? What is Allah going to do with your punishment? إِن شَكَرْتُمْ وَآمَنْتُمْ. If you show gratitude and believe. SubhanAllah. What's mentioned first? Iman or shukr? Shukr was mentioned first. Because it's the root of that iman. It's the root of that iman. Next one. How do we increase shukr? How do we increase gratitude? There's many different ways. There's a big list here. Number one, meditative techniques also lead to an increased sense of gratitude, and this was found in positive psychology. And we also know from the Quran, فَعْبُدْ وَكُمْ مِنَ الشَّاكِرِينَ. Allah says in the Quran, worship Allah and be of those who are grateful. Increasing humility, being optimistic, remembering Allah's blessings. Fasting also increases shukr. Allah mentions at the end of the ayah about Ramadan, Allah mentions all of this. What is for what reason? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. So that you can be grateful. Ramadan and fasting also makes you grateful. When you eat that first morsel at iftar time, you appreciate that food more than you appreciate other food. And you're more thankful about that. So shukr is also adopted through fasting as well. Having taqwa as well. Realizing Allah's concessions for the believers. This is interesting. That Allah mentions a lot of times how He made things easy for us. That okay, if you can't find water, that's fine. You can just make tayammum. And then Allah says, what is the reason for this? He loves for you to be purified. وَلَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. And so you can be grateful. Grateful at what? That Allah has made things easy for us. Right? Shortening the salah when we're traveling as well. Earning money. Allah mentions. وَلِتَبْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ. That you can seek the bounty of Allah. That you can earn and work and get money. So what's the reason for this? So you can be grateful to Allah. Basically, I just mentioned this long list, but the idea is, any blessing in your life that you've been given, the point of which is so that you can be grateful. That is the point. That is the purpose by which you have been blessed with all these, the primary purpose. Even sleep as well is described as so you can be grateful to Allah. And there are people who are insomniac, right? They can't sleep. And it's a big blessing to be able to sleep at night. Okay, how's everyone doing? Good? So fine? Okay, because I have another component of the presentation. If I start now, I'm going to go to the end, it's going to be finished. Or we can just stop here and go for Q&A. This part of the presentation is, we often hear, who here has heard about, the components of worship? You should be feeling love, hope, and fear. You guys have heard this, right? And this quote by Ibn al-Qayyim, very, very famous. You guys have heard of this quote, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to be discussing, not as in-depth as sabr and shukr, but kind of briefly overviewing what kind of psychology says about these emotions and how we can adopt these emotions as well. We're going to be going through these as well as case studies. So I just want to hear from you. We can stop and end the presentation there, and I think that, alhamdulillah, it's been good. Or we can go, and we'll go for Q&A, or we can just continue the presentation. What do you guys want? Continue?
Continue.
Okay.
If we continue, there's no Q&A, is that what you're saying?
No, there'll be Q&A still. It'll just be, we'll be here for a bit longer maybe. Okay, let's go. Actually, go back. Just to read the quote. The heart on its journey towards Allah is like that of a bird. Love is its head, and fear and hope are its two wings. From Madarij Salikin by Ibn al-Qayyim. This is the reality of love, hope, and fear. Go. So, this is an interesting quote from Nazir. You guys know Nazir, right? Whoever doesn't know Nazir? Dr. Nazir Khan. He was an alumni of McMaster. And he mentioned a very interesting quote that really resonated with me. I really was something that really struck me. And that he said, the psychology of Iman is that of hope, whereas the psychology of disbelief is that of despair. Now, we're going to be talking about hope now, so that's what we're going to be talking about. Hope, raja in Arabic. Raja, not raja, raja. Hope. So, the definition
from a positive psych perspective. Charles Snyder was a leading researcher in the field of hope. He actually passed away in recently, 2006, I believe. And so he describes and he talks about hope, and he says that hope is defined as a positive motivational state that is based on an interactively derived sense of successful agency and pathways. What the heck does that mean? There are a lot of buzzwords and terms that we're going to break down. But essentially, the thing with hope is that it's something which really has been the driving and motivational force for revolutions in human history, for movements in human history. It's what gave the slaves in America the courage and the motivation to search for their freedom. And it's what gave them as well to march for their rights in the civil rights movement. It's what led Gandhi and the Indians to rebel against peacefully against the British colonialism. Hope is something that, and of course in our tradition as well, imagining the plain of the Battle of Badr, that is also a sense in which we can also resonate with what the understanding of hope is, that these believers had hope and understanding that things can get better. That's really what you break down hope is. It's that you think and you know that things can get better. And so this definition, what it basically is saying, it's a positive, just kind of ignore this, it's a positive motivational state that's there. And it's comprised of two things, agency and pathways. What are those two things? Agency is your sense of understanding that you are able to affect a certain situation, that you are able to change a certain life outcome. That's the sense of agency, that you have the ability or the power or the skills, not necessarily the skills, just you are able to change. That's agency. Pathways is that you have the specific skills in order to remove yourself from a certain situation. Do you understand the difference? Who wants to explain agency?
Can you explain agency?
Sorry?
I didn't catch that.
Oh, you didn't catch it. Agency is your understanding that your belief that you can affect the future, essentially. Your belief that you can affect the future. Pathways is your belief that you have the skills to be able to figure out how to obtain a goal. Do you see the difference? It's an important distinction. Agency is the belief of what? You can affect the future. Pathways is you have the skills to obtain a certain goal. Right? It's like it makes sense when you think of it, it links to the word, right? Agency, you're the agent behind something. You are able to affect some change. Pathways, you have the ways in which to do that. Yes?
So basically it's like the management and then we have the workforce.
Yeah. Interesting kind of way of looking at it. Yeah. That's a better way of explaining it. So what's interesting here is that when it comes to what we should be feeling towards Allah Azza wa Jalla, or even just in our life in general, hope in general, is encompassed within tawakkul. Agency and pathways are enhanced to the highest point with tawakkul. Why? Because in terms of agency, it's actually a paradox in that the more you humble yourself and realize you can't do anything without Allah's sake, the more Allah will help you and the more you have belief that your state will change. But it's not the belief that you change it, it's the belief that Allah will change it. And that's agency. That Allah can affect the future. And Allah will help you. Having that husn dhan billah, the good thoughts about Allah. And pathways is the second component of tawakkul. We often hear tie your camel, right? Very common phrase. That you need to, after you have the sense of agency that Allah can affect the future and Allah can change your condition, and you have that iman, which is true. A lot of times it's difficult to have hope when you don't believe in God. Because you be realistic with yourself. Man, I can't do anything. At this point, I can't do anything. But as a believer, you're always thinking, or Allah can change my condition. Pathways is about, okay, I need to identify, I need to put in my effort before Allah helps me. So pathways is in identifying what kind of skills did Allah bless you with to be able to obtain a certain goal. And so as you can see, tawakkul encompasses both of these states. Oh, go back? I thought I had another slide. What was that? So just some... no? Okay, keep going. We're good. Sorry. So now we go into fear. So that was raja. That is hope. That is hope. You hope in the rahmah of Allah. Right? In the sense that Allah can change things and Allah will help you as you endeavor to change things. Now in terms of
Fear. Now this is an emotion that people are confused about. And it's because the English definition is used, fear. What do you think of fear? What do you think when you think of fear? Yeah?
It has a negative connotation.
Negative connotation. Is it a positive experience or a negative experience? It's a negative experience, right? It's a negative experience. Remember I said how the emotions of Iman are supposed to broaden our ibadah? So, if we analyze how Allah describes quote-unquote fear in the Quran, there are many different ways that Allah describes the emotional state of the believer in this kind of arena. So I'm going to mention, there's actually a lot more, it's a huge list. I'm just mentioning three main ones. Number one, khawf. Khawf is actually, I would say, is that negative type of fear. But khawf is not directed necessarily directly towards Allah. Khawf is always in reference to the hereafter. Right? وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ. The one who has khawf in standing before Allah Azza wa Jal in the hereafter. And that he'll be taken into account. وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. And controls himself and his desires. This is in Surah Nazi'at, right? That khawf. وَمَنْ يَخَافَ الْآخِرَ. Allah, with the khawf, the word khawf is really in regards to Jahannam, the punishment of Jahannam. And in that sense, it makes sense. Yeah, you're going to be afraid. It's a negative thing. But remember, what was the action tendency of fear? Who remembers? Escape. So it's actually a good thing in this sense, that when you feel fear of hellfire, when you read description of hellfire, you're like, I gotta get away from this place. I gotta escape from Jahannam. And so it's also another thing. So that's khawf, and it's specifically in regards to the hereafter. Khashya is the one that's mentioned with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Man khashya ar-Rahman, right? Whoever has khashya before ar-Rahman, it's really interesting because it's khashya ar-Rahman. Whoever has khashya of the exceedingly merciful. Why would you fear someone who's exceedingly merciful? There's many different ways. I'm not going to talk about that kind of nuance there, but the sense of khashya is more a sense of awe. A more sense of awe. And it's linked to knowledge. That when you have knowledge of Allah, then you have khashya of Allah. When you have knowledge of Allah, you get khashya of Allah. And so that is with khashya. So here this very famous ayah, that verily, only those who have knowledge have true khashya of Allah. Only those who have knowledge have true khashya of Allah. Awe and reverence, as I put here. When you know the greatness and magnitude of something or someone. The last one that I'm going to mention is khushu'. Khushu', as we talked about before, is an overwhelming fear that's shown on the face and limbs. And this is an example here, and we already visited this ayah before. Now there's many different things here. I'm going to focus on this. Khashya. Next slide. I'm going to focus on khashya. So khashya, awe. From a sight perspective, there's a whole study about awe and reverence. And there's two components of awe, which is really interesting, because they apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first component of awe, of feeling awe of something, is realizing the vastness of something. Realizing the vastness of something. This could be in terms of physical size or social size. You know, sometimes people are in awe of celebrities. It's not like they might be big, they might be even very short. It's not the physical size. It's the social size. Oh my God, this guy making this much money, that much fame. You feel a sense of awe. Right? You feel a sense of awe. There's also social size. Or in a metaphysical size as well. Social is a type of metaphysical size. It could be fame, authority, prestige, all these different things. So when it comes to, and there are different signs of vastness, right? There are signs of vastness. So for example, loud sounds such as thunder, right? Not this thunder. The other thunder, and it's really interesting because Allah describes nature as His ayat, His signs. Signs of Allah's magnitude, His grandeur. Right? That when you look and gaze upon the cosmos, you get a sense of vastness of space. And that makes you appreciate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. And that when you experience this vastness, which is either through actually seeing nature, which is either through loud sounds, for example, like even the thunder. That's why there's specific dhikr when you hear thunder. Right? You're supposed to make tasbih of Allah when you hear the thunder. Because it's a very awe-inspiring type event when you actually hear it very up close and personal. Not behind, a window. If you ever actually heard like thunder, you're just, wow. It's amazing. And so, what happens is, after you experience that, so you experience some vastness, the second step for awe is accommodation. Who here has taken child psych or is in child psych? Okay, child psychology. So there's that theory, how do you pronounce it? It's P-I-A-G-E-T. Is it Piaget or is it Piaget?
Piaget.
Piaget, I thought it was Piaget, it's a French thing, right? So he talks about accommodation and assimilation. In terms of when you encounter a new experience, you can either accommodate or you can assimilate. Accommodate means you acquire new mental structures to be able to accommodate for a certain experience. Assimilation is you assimilate that experience to existing mental structures. Anyways, for those of you who weren't in child psych, you didn't need to get that, it's fine. Accommodation is essentially this, in terms of vastness. You experience something vast. And so let's make it in terms of a spiritual experience. You read about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's majesty in the Quran. And you're praying salah, and you just feel the sense of vastness of Allah. Right? You could be even praying outside, and you have your waterfall in front of you, really nice kind of scene. And you experience this vastness. What happens is that you experience something which currently your mental structures cannot comprehend properly. And so what happens is that new mental structures are made in order to accommodate your new experience. And that's why all experiences are often linked with experiences of enlightenment. That you have experienced new truths, new spiritual truths. And this is exactly what we learn about when it comes to our spiritual tradition. That when you have a sense of spiritual perception of Allah, that you worship Allah as if you see Him, that you witness and experience the grandness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you actually experience this. And thus, your heart encompasses these truths and it changes yourself. It changes your mental structures so that it alters your perception and you're able to see reality truly and fully. Truly and fully. And that is vastness and accommodation. And that is the state we all hope to achieve as well. That when you constantly fill your heart with the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you get that sense of vastness and it accommodates for more spiritual truths that you're able to experience. And there are many different types of awe experiences, and it depends on the context. So some awe experiences can be flavored with fear, in the sense of there's a physical threat, and I mentioned this about the hereafter, right? There can also be in terms of beauty, when you look at the creation around you, right? The aesthetic pleasure. So there's a beauty type of flavor to the awe experience. When you look at the from an admiration perspective, that you admire something about someone else. And it's interesting because this could also apply to the Prophet ﷺ. It specifically talks about virtue, that you're really admiring some person and his moral virtue, and how he's such a morally upright person. And this is the case with our Prophet ﷺ. This is our case with our Prophet ﷺ. Respect, and I don't want to go into this, it's going to take too long. Let's just go to the next thing. Okay, hub, love. This is in regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So love is viewed as an amalgam, which basically means as a combination of distinct positive emotions directed towards one object. So all positive emotions directed towards one object is what love is. That's according to their definition. We all know what love is inside. When we think of love, we know what it is. It's not something you need to define. But it's an interesting way of putting at it like this. Because this is something we need to have before Allah Azza wa Jalla. And it definitely does foster love. That when you constantly experience positive emotions towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will engender that love. Awe, as we mentioned before, positive experience, right? An enlightening experience towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hope, we talked about that, towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Joy, where did the joy come from? There's two types of joy. There's the joy in which you experience when you read about the descriptions of Jannah, which fosters that love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah has prepared this for me. You know, make this more concrete. Imagine you know of someone, a friend of yours who said, you know what, don't worry about it, I'm going to accommodate you, I'm going to have all your hotels paid for, all your food done, it's all good, just come over and everything's going to be fine. You feel a sense of love for that person, right? Why? Because they promised you with something good. Allah has promised you with eternal pleasure. Allah has promised you with eternal pleasure. And the joy that we feel is now towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what stems from that? Gratitude. That every single blessing in your life is directed towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what alhamdulillah is. It's about all those positive emotions of gratitude are all directed to Allah.
Even though other people might be the means by which that blessing is delivered. The Prophet said, you haven't thanked Allah until you thank the people. Allah uses different means to bless you. But those are just the means. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of those blessings. And so every one of those blessings that you experience, anything good in your life, anytime you're having a good time, that's from Allah Azza wa Jal. That's from Allah Azza wa Jal. And so all that gratitude is due to Allah. So this positive emotion is to Allah. Interest as well. In terms of seeking knowledge, you're interested about Allah's deen. You're interested about Allah. You learn about His names and attributes. You learn about His deen. You learn about, you start studying Islam. Interest towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His deen. Contentment, rida. To have that sense of contentment towards Allah. There's that dhikr. رَضِيتُ بِاللَّهِ رَبَّا وَبِالْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا وَبِمُحَمَّدٍ صلى الله عليه وسلم نَبِيًّا. That you are content and you are pleased with Allah as your master. Having that sense of rida, that contentment towards Allah. These are just a list I just mentioned, but you can go on about all the positive emotions that you direct towards Allah. And when you combine them all, it fosters that love. And I believe this is the last slide after this one. What I'm going to be talking about in the next slide is about what are the different factors that we can use to manipulate our love for something or someone. And there are 4 factors. There are 4 factors. Don't pay attention to that. Just listen for a second. There are 4 factors in which love is based upon. There it is. 4 factors. Love based upon. And this is taken from, who here's taken intro psych? Everyone's taken intro psych, right? Yeah, this is from the unit of intro. Alright, we're done. So, those take intro psych. So the 4 factors are, number 1, who can remember from back then? Don't put it up. Who can remember, or before he puts it up? Quick. Proximity and? Not behavior.
Something with a B.
Beauty. There we go. Second or third?
Other's opinion.
Other person's opinion. And 4th? Anticipating to meet that person. Really good, mashallah. What happened? Oh! I was actually really excited. I was like, wow, these guys got it. Anyways, so proximity. And this is interesting because we can think about Allah Azza wa Jalla in these terms as well. Functional proximity. How often do you interact with the individual? How often do we interact with Allah? How often do we make dua to Allah? Allah says, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. When my servant asks about me, I am near. He's there. How often do we interact with Him? When you talk about proximity, it's both in terms of physical distance, but also functional proximity. How often do you interact with that person? How often do you interact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The more we interact with Allah, the more we can gain we can adopt love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Beauty. Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. When you see the beauty of creation, it'll engender that sense of admiration of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because this is the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other's opinion as well. What the other person thinks of you, if that other person likes you, for example, and has a good opinion of you, then you're more likely to like that other person as well. Right? You're more likely to... What is Allah's opinion of you? Allah loves you more than your own mother. 70 times. SubhanAllah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. My compassion, my love, my kindness, my care encompasses everything. That is Allah's opinion of you. When we realize that, you're able to engender a sense of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala back. That He is the source of all of the blessings in your life. That all those positive emotions are directed towards Him. And that He loves you and cares for you and nourishes you to this point and this time. The 4th one, anticipating to meet. If you are set to meet, if you have an appointment to meet someone, you're more likely to like that person. When you're even just anticipating to meet someone. We all have an appointment before Allah Azza wa Jalla. The Prophet ﷺ said that every person will stand before his Creator without an intermediary. Just you and Allah. That is the appointment. What have you prepared for? What have you prepared for? Do you have the answers to the difficult questions about your life that Allah will ask? Do you hope to meet Allah? Are you excited about this time in which you can see Allah finally? That we've been veiled from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life, And then in the next life, we have the opportunity for the greatest blessing. The single greatest blessing of Jannah is being able to gaze at the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَتِهِ أَحَدًا. For the one who hopes, anticipates for the meeting of their master, of their Lord, of the one who took care of them, then let them عَمَلًا صَالِحًا. Start doing good deeds. Start being moral people. Start developing a relationship with Allah. And وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَتِهِ أَحَدًا. And don't make any other person a priority in your life besides Allah. Allah should be that ultimate priority. And I just want to end with a quote by Ibn al-Qayyim from Miftah Dar al-Sa'ada. A very interesting quote about this sense of starting this spiritual journey and doing our best to engender these emotions in the ibadah of Allah. Ibn al-Qayyim says, the heart comes to Ar-Rahman, the exceedingly merciful, humbled in His presence. This is, Ibn al-Qayyim is describing the experience of a slave in worship with Allah. So praying with Allah. That the heart, even though the body is here, the heart goes to Allah, humbled in His presence, and makes sajda. The qalb makes sajda. A sajda where its head never rises until the Day of Judgment. That you have now consciously made it in your mind that you are going to be a submitter before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That you are a Muslim and that you submit to this way of life. That is that sajda of the heart. That will never rise. This is the home and sanctuary of the heart. When you start having this sense of emotion while you're praying, this is your time of tranquility. This is your place of relief. This is your a place of sanctuary. That whenever you're going throughout the hustle and bustle of your day, the stresses of your day, you could be stressed out from midterms, from your family, from your friends, from whatever. But when you're standing before Allah Azza wa Jal, your heart finds a place of sanctuary and tranquility. And this is in ibadah. And just to trail off here, Ibn Taymiyyah used to always say that there is a Jannah in this world. None enters the Jannah in the next world until he enters the Jannah, he or she enters the Jannah in this world. And that Jannah, that paradise, we know what Jannah is, ultimate pleasure, bliss. That Jannah, that bliss is in the ibadah of Allah. We all have the potential to create within ourselves a Jannah, pleasure, bliss. And it is in the worship of Allah. This is the home and sanctuary of the heart. This is of the greatest ayat of Allah. You want conviction, you want true faith, you want faith that doesn't worry. This is of the greatest ayat of Allah. If you can develop your soul to the point that you can get to this spiritual experience when you're praying salat to Allah, this is of the greatest ayat of Allah. This journey of the heart has the most blessed fruits and the greatest end. This journey is the life of the souls, the key to happiness. And it is the richness of the intellect. I thank you all for coming out and spending all your time to be with us here for this presentation. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those true worshippers of Him. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who are able to gaze at His face in Jannah. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those spiritual beings who are able to feel the khushu' in their salah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless every one of you. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. We can now open it up for Q&A.